Coming up, you will hear an interview with the Florida State beat writer for the Orlando Sentinel and formerly the Georgia Tech beat writer for the Macon Telegraph, Coley Harvey. You can hear more of our interviews at georgiasportstalk.com. Well, hey, Coley, straight up, what's the difference between covering Florida State and Jimbo Fisher, their head coach, and Georgia Tech and head coach Paul Johnson?
Well, there's a little bit of a difference as far as access. For instance, Paul Johnson was kind of starting to scale back a little bit there the last couple of years I was at Tech, and Jimbo has been pretty scaled back. There's certain times you can talk to players, and certain times you can talk to him. It's a little tougher to get the access down here that you had there at Georgia Tech. But I mean, it's just a part of the game these days, and you roll with the punches, and I think to this point we've handled it pretty well since I've been down here. As far as difference in covering the team, in a certain sense, and I don't mean to sound a certain way when I say this, but in a certain sense it's a little bit more of a higher profile job for me, and that's not necessarily because of FSU and Georgia Tech. It's because I'm at a bigger paper and bigger market and more eyes, so to speak. So that's been not an adjustment. That's been something that's been pretty fun to work with, and definitely something that's been different about this opportunity. And it's a team that coming into the year we all everywhere thought that this would be a team contending for definitely an ACC championship, but maybe even a national championship. So that kind of added to the to the workload there early on, but no complaints at all. It's been a fun ride. I've really enjoyed it down here, and miss Atlanta at times, but I definitely am enjoying my time here.
You mentioned the disappointment this season compared to what the expectations were. That kind of seems to how it's been with Florida State the last half a dozen years. Of course, when Bobby Bowden finished up the last few years, there was disappointment, and now with Jimbo Fisher, like you said, they were thinking national championship, and now they've got 3 losses already with quite a bit more of the season to go. What are you hearing from the fans and from the people surrounding the program that they thought they had turned the corner last year, and here another disappointing season's laying in their lap?
Yeah, things kind of changed pretty quickly, especially after their loss to Wake Forest back in, that was the 5th game of the year for the Seminoles. They ended up falling to 2-3, lost to Wake Forest, and I mean, you could just hear the belly aching and the complaints, and, the players who were on Twitter were getting hammered with, in many cases, very derogatory messages by people who said they were fans, people who had been supportive of them all year. And, you just really saw that the wheels kind of fall off the bandwagon. And, that was also the same week that the Seminoles basically said, okay, we're getting off Twitter. We're using this to maybe refocus a little bit and then to ignore some of the distractions. So it seems like, to this point, it seems like it's worked. They played very well against Duke. Granted, I know that was Duke, and, it's a program you can't really gauge how well you play, but they did play respectably enough where it looked like they were the team that we expected to see. They were moving around defensively a lot better, cut down on the penalties, which had been an issue. They actually entered that ball game leading the country in penalties and penalty yards. So they cut down on that in that game. The offense has looked better now that E.J. Manuel, the starting quarterback, is back in there. Of course, he was injured in that big game against the then number 1 Oklahoma back in week 3. And really, when that happened, the Seminoles didn't admit it, but it really did kind of take the sails out of their year. You're talking about your big leader, your big offensive producer who goes down with this sudden injury, and they just weren't really able to overcome that in the next couple of ball games. So definitely a tough year for the fans down here to stomach. Kind of a disappointing year for sure, but one that they're not done yet. There's still an outside shot that, depending on how things go with Clemson and Wake Forest, where they could sneak back into the Atlantic Division race, and maybe that mythical trip to Charlotte is still an option.
With the ACC, you never know, Coley. We've seen it the last few years where teams that seem to have things their way all of a sudden don't play well, so that could definitely be a possibility. Up until this point of the season, though, it has been a disappointment, and you went through that last year with Georgia Tech with the 6-7 season, and you got a chance from the inside to kind of see how the fans respond to this. How do you compare the Georgia Tech fan base to the Florida State fan base, during tough times, how they react? I know the Georgia Tech fans oftentimes think that they're, really negative and ogres. Would you say that it's pretty common, or how do you compare?
Yeah, I mean, fans are fans, especially when you're a die-hard fan. You know, you're gonna kind of live and die with the team and ride those emotional highs. So I would say, you know, no matter where you are, you still feel the same effects. And I guess I'm kind of hearing and seeing some of the same things that I saw last year, some of the same finger pointing that I saw last year at Georgia Tech. And, it is kind of bizarre to be in this scenario back-to-back years. Like some people have joked with me, I guess I'm kind of the link here. I'm the bad luck link right now. Although, of course, again, you can't forget I was there in 2009 with the ACC championship. So there's that variable to counter it. But it's kind of the same deal. You know, the fans here, you know, were complaining about coaching after certain things. They were also complaining about play calling and, you know, just kind of the same things that fans do. And some of it had merit and some of it didn't. So again, just time will tell with this year's team. I think that those injuries, they've just taken a big hit. Not only E.J. Manuel, but offensive line. They've got two guys right now who look like they could be done for the year. One guy for sure. The other guy we're not positive of, but he's probably not seeing the field anytime soon. Both those guys are seniors, are key veterans. You know, you've got the starting tailback who's done for the year with a back injury. You know, you have a defensive lineman who's done for the year now with an ankle, a dislocated ankle. So it's just one after the other, boom, 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 boom. It just seems like guys keep falling down here, and it's just one of those years.
We're talking with Coley Harvey, the beat writer for the Orlando Sentinel that covers Florida State. Coley, of course, used to cover Georgia Tech for the Macon Telegraph, did that for several years, got to know Paul Johnson and the program inside out. Coley, how about comparing Paul Johnson to Jimbo Fisher?
Two different personalities, two distinctly different people, but both of them, I really enjoyed working with Paul. I've said that before, and I really enjoyed his candor and you know, the way that he treated the reporters at times. Yeah, I know there are those reports out there about how vicious he could be, and I've actually heard he's probably tamed down a little bit this year. But, you know, you appreciate some of that when you've got a guy who is up front with you and who will challenge you, who is a smart coach like Paul was. So, I really enjoyed working with Paul. Jimbo's a little bit different, just as far as, again, the access is a little bit different, so it's a little tougher to make quite the same connection with him, but he's still very friendly with the media, very outgoing. And actually, that last or the press conference after the Wake Forest game, his weekly press conference, he came out and got to a point where the SID was getting ready to wrap up the news conference, and then Jimbo said, "Oh no, yeah, I'll stand here. I got a lot of questions I need to answer." And that just kind of showed how he was really taking responsibility, really taking accountability for the way that this year has gone. And that said a lot to me. Then seeing that moment, I said, "Wow, this guy really is trying to at least show his fans that he's accepting the blame in some of this," and that's kind of how both those guys are. Paul, would accept that blame too when certain things went wrong last year. So that's good to see about the quality of the individual to see that out of both those guys. So different personalities, like I said, but I've enjoyed being around Jimbo for sure.
Coley, how about Clemson, Georgia Tech? That's their next opponent. A very powerful team with a lot of excellent skill position players. What can you tell us about Clemson? Of course, Clemson played Florida State early in the year and came out with the victory. How does Clemson look to you?
Yeah, Clemson is they're the real deal. They're very strong. Granted, I'm kind of the same mindset as everybody that eventually they're going to have this Clemson type year and they're going to lay an egg against somebody, and it seems like it should happen one week and it doesn't. It should have happened with Virginia Tech, but Virginia Tech just completely got outplayed. Maryland gave them a great run, but just couldn't pull it off at the end. So I think it's really going to come down to Georgia Tech. That's going to be a big game. That's a game a lot of people here in Tallahassee have circled because they feel like, okay, if Clemson can lose to Georgia Tech and maybe North Carolina and maybe one other one down the road, Florida State has an outside shot of getting back into the Atlantic race. And, so a lot of people down here are going to be watching that game. I'm obviously going to be watching it. I know that Clemson has struggled in Atlanta the last few years. It is not, Bobby Dodd Stadium has not been a very friendly arena for the Clemson team. And we'll see. But the guy that Georgia Tech fans are really going to be amazed by, I think everybody across the country is starting to finally hear about this guy, but Sammy Watkins. I mean, he's the receiver there, number 2 for Clemson. True freshman, actually a guy who Florida State at some point was recruiting. And, I guess it basically kind of came down to a numbers thing. There was him and 2 other guys Florida State were recruiting, all top flight receivers, and Florida State went with the other 2. So I'm sure they're kicking themselves a little bit over, the fact that this guy has just blown up so much this year. But he's just very quick, can get in space, very elusive, knows his routes really well, runs a lot of wide receiver screens, a lot of bubble screens to him. He can also go deep on a fly route downfield. So, you're talking about a guy who's very versatile as a receiver, and then he's also a punt returner, he's also a punt returner, and he's very versatile in that regard as well. So Watkins is going to be a guy to watch for sure. How well Georgia Tech defends him is basically going to be where the game rests.
We're finishing up with Coley Harvey, the beat writer for the Orlando Sentinel, covers Florida State. Coley, what do you miss most about covering Georgia Tech?
I miss going to campus on Saturdays. Granted it's a different vibe down here, and I really enjoy this vibe here. You really have, it's a bigger stadium here and that kind of deal. And, they had college game day here a few weeks ago, and that was really special. It was the first time I'd actually been a part of that. So that, so I enjoy that. But of course, Tech might have game day in a week or so. So that's also something to look forward to in Atlanta. But I do miss that. I miss, getting off 75, 85, turning onto 10th Street, turning onto 1st Street, and, making my way up towards the stadium from there, and passing the frat houses on Saturday morning, seeing the people out and about, and, and getting a chance to, if I get there early enough, to slide by Yellow Jacket Alley, and kind of seeing the guys come up. So that's, there's a lot of things that you could point to. That's probably one memory I have. And then also the people that I got to work with, in sports information and the administration there at Georgia Tech. And then, of course, with the team, I do kind of miss those guys. I'll, when I get a free moment, I might communicate with one or 2 of them from time to time. But it's just one of those deals. You got to move on. And like I said, I have no regrets about moving on. I'm glad I'm where I'm at right now.
Well, Coley, really appreciate you coming on the show again. Continued success down in Orlando. We all knew when we had you up at Georgia Tech, it wouldn't be long before you probably had a bigger and better opportunity. And best wishes to you and continued success.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jim. And hopefully we'll see you guys here sooner rather than later.
We invite you to hear more of our interviews at georgiasportstalk.com.